So here's, by the way, you guys are weird. Nobody gets together and reads the Bible in public anymore, but let's do that. This is, this is the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 4. I mean, it says Matthew. Oh, cool. Well, I'm going to read what this one is. If it's Matthew or Luke, I'm not really sure. But I wrote a sermon on this, so here's what we're going to do. I think this is right. It's probably just the wrong name. Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. After fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. The tempter came to him and said, "If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread." These are the words of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Is that Matthew or Luke? Did anybody look it up? See, nobody cares. That's what we're looking at. That's Luke, so we'll call it Luke 4. If I'm like you're going to be like somebody later today is going to be like, "What passage was your sermon on today?" Okay, so this Wednesday, Katie mentioned, this Wednesday begins the season of Lent. And this morning, I want to kind of try to connect this series that we've been doing on rest with the season of Lent and really kind of ask this question. What if we really examined our appetites for the next 40 days-ish and chose to give some of those appetites a rest? For thousands of years, Christians have, I can feel you pulling away. Thank you, but no, I'm fervently good with my appetites, me as well. For thousands of years, Christians have spent the 40 days leading up to Easter preparing themselves for resurrection by preparing themselves for the death that necessarily comes before resurrection, by facing themselves for 40 days, looking at their inner journey and specifically mortality, right? That's why on Wednesday, if you go for an imposition of ashes, what we'll say is, remember that you are dust, and to dust you will return, which is the mortality piece, right? But the resurrection piece is remember that you are stardust. And the stardust that you came from, right? The spirit from which all things came, that's the same thing you're going back to. So all is well, right? Christians have readied themselves to join Jesus in living and dying for love. That's the preparation of the season of Lent. Not just, what can I give up? And this is like, what's the white knuckle stubborn Olympics? Like, what did you give? What did I give up? Well, I gave up more. I can do it. I can grit my teeth and make it through. The old college try. Instead, what if we sort of turned the question and asked, what could die so that I might truly live, right? What could I let die off for 40 days? And then I'm experiencing maybe a little bit more life there. And this is great because the tradition for a couple thousand years now, the tradition has people examining bastions, right? Patterns, habits, strongholds of the false self, right? These areas of our lives that have really taken maybe our toxic and destructive words, maybe our obsession with control, that's me, our engagement with pain, our need to fix other people. I mean, big stuff, and then very often that's very overwhelming. And so we give up chocolate or alcohol or something like that for 40 days. And no judgment if you're going to give something up, whatever you give up, as long as that practice makes you more in touch with your mortality, more available to your own limitations and your own finitude, more aware of the appetites that are really driving you and the appetites that sustain you. Lent reminds us that we have to die in order to be raised. And Jesus invites us not to wait. That's the invitation to the way. That's the invitation to discipleship, to the Christian journey, to spiritual practice, whatever you want to call it. The invitation is to die before we die. To die before we die, that we might live. I'm getting ahead of myself. So Matthew 4, Jesus is led into the wilderness where he fasts for 40 days. And the text says, in case anyone's hungry, and in case anyone's fuzzy, he's hungry. I'm hungry. Yeah, 40 days. Anybody fasted? How long has anyone? Yeah? He almost raised his hand. He's like, I'm not going to be alone. Yeah, so I'm like, some days. Cool. There's 6 or 8 of us. So he's when I'm sleeping, yeah. Man, I intermittent fast every day from my head hits the pillow to when I get up. Yeah, so we all fast. Good one, I like that. So he fasts for 40 days, right? And we got to remember, this is theological poetry from 40, 50, 60 years after Jesus actually did this. This is not eyewitness reporting. So when they write Jesus fasted in the wilderness for 40 days, the number 40, it means something. It's an homage, it's a nod, it's connected to something, especially in the Jewish mind. Anyone who has exposure to the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament, when you hear that Jesus went and fasted in the wilderness for 40 days and he was hungry, does that ring any bells? The wilderness, 40 days. Okay, Israel, the Exodus. Okay, so if you've got some background, you know this. Well, obviously then this was deep in the mind of the early followers of Jesus. So this is a connection to the consciousness of the Jewish mind, the story and the tribe that Jesus comes from. So, but this isn't about Jesus only. This locates Jesus in this larger story. We find Jesus hungry and tempted, and there's much more going on in those 40 days. It speaks to those 40 years that Israel spent wandering in the wilderness. But it's important to remember they weren't just wandering in the wilderness, they were hungry and tempted. And they were led off course by their appetites. And that story, the wilderness wandering, is rooted in another story about a garden and about these proto-humans who were led off course by their appetites and their temptations. They're hungry and tempted. And they are led away from peace and plenty by these appetites. And we know that the apple is about much more than the apple, right, in the story. And this may only be true for me, but I suspect it's not. How often are our appetites, and not just food, but how often are our appetites for power, sex, work, and time, money, and status, and on, whatever it is, how often are our appetites really about these questions? Am I really loved? Am I really okay? Is there really something for me to do with my life? Is there something important for me to do while I'm here? Am I really loved? Am I really okay? Is there really something important for me to do with my life? And I want to make a couple confessions now. I had a hellacious appetite for bourbon for the better part of 2 decades. And I'll be really honest, a lot of the time my appetite for bourbon was not really about the bourbon. It was really about drinking against those questions. Am I really loved? Am I really okay? Is there really something for me to do with my life? Drinking against those questions until I didn't hear them anymore. Drinking until those answers didn't matter anymore. And sure, now I don't drink, and that's fine. But when after a stressful day or week, I dig into a whole pizza or a tray of Chinese food that says it's enough for 3 people, but I do intend to and indeed finish it by myself, I'm eating against those same questions. I'm eating against that same distrust. Am I really loved? Am I really okay? Is there really something important for me to do with my life? And this is not new for me. I got really heavy in high school, and then I had an eating disorder in college. My problem has always been about too much and too little. I struggle with moderation, right? I've always been an addict. I've recently had the language for it because I don't want a slice of pizza. I want a pizza. I don't want a glass of bourbon. I want a bottle of bourbon. I don't want to get buzzed. I want to black out. I don't want to go for a run. I want to do an Ironman. I don't want to diet. I want to be perfect. I don't want a day job. I want an all-consuming obsession. I'm an addict. And the issue is never at its root the booze, the food, the drug. It's the way that I abused it or abused myself by restricting it. The point is, it's not about some bread, right? The devil says, turn these stones into bread. It's not about bread. It's not the apple in the garden. Very often it's the appetite under the appetite. And that's what Lent invites us to examine. We can't join Jesus in resurrection if we haven't died to that deep down stuff. And again, I want to be very clear because the church has done way more than we need in terms of shaming people and identifying good and bad. These things are not bad. Right? Very often these appetites, they come from very good, healthy ego development, which we need. As kids, we need it as young adults. and they can run away from us. And they can run away with us. These appetites, they come from necessary stages in ego development. Some scholars say things like trust, power, control, esteem. Others say praise, power, pleasure, safety. They're not bad in and of themselves. We need these things. But when we abuse them against these questions about our acceptance and the significance of our life, they can distort the self. They can pull us way off track. They can lead us to all sorts of destructive and self-destructive ways of being. And this story says that Jesus, before he's ready to embrace his public ministry, before he's ready to go do the things he's called to do, to heal people, to say good news, he's led into the wilderness to wrestle with his appetites. It says the Spirit led him. Right? Like the Spirit handed Jesus over to the devil. Interesting, another sermon for another day. The Spirit led him to be tempted or tested. There's a little footnote, which means that the Spirit led Jesus to face these appetites head on. Here for food, then for power, then for worship. And the translators of the text, they struggled with this. So they included a note that it could be equally, he was tested or he was tempted. And I wonder, as we enter the Lenten season, if one of those words brings something up for you, if you feel like there's very clearly an alarm bell that goes off in your head, there's a temptation you've been struggling with, or something going on in your life and you know that you're being tested. Maybe those words resonate. And I think that they're meant to remind us that this is the human experience, right? This is what it means for Jesus to be fully human. And for us to be able to fully relate with Jesus as a rabbi or as a guru or as someone that we follow, what is tempting us as we enter Lent this year? What is testing us as we enter the season of Lent? Could it be that we each have a sacred calling, some vocation, some work, something significant to do with our lives, right? Not to watch the news or scroll social media and go, somebody ought to, right? But I feel called to. This is what I'm supposed to do with my life. That we're loved and we're valued. We have immeasurable worth just as we are. Nothing can change it. And the question is, as we enter this season of self-reflection, is do we really trust that? Can we accept that we're accepted? Do we accept the gift and the responsibility that comes with a sacred life? Have you got some appetites, some addictions, some cravings, some obsessions? And maybe these things are getting in the way of trusting this truth about yourself, that you're loved and you're okay and you've got good work to do. Maybe there are appetites that are getting in the way of your true self hearing that truth, that you're okay. Do you have some habits or tendencies or patterns of needing to escape, to numb, to avoid, to repress, to indulge, to binge? And I want to be very clear again, we're not doing the shame thing, we're not doing the judgment thing. I'm not talking about healthy rhythms of rest and feast and enjoyment and wringing every bit of life out of life. You can ask Brooks and Joe, right? We're not skimping, we're living life to the fullest. We're monastics, we're not ascetics. I'm talking about the appetites that you're very aware of and that you can become more aware of during these 40 days, the appetites that allow you to avoid dealing with the stress, that allow you to avoid dealing with the present, the loneliness, the fear, to avoid dealing with these questions about love and acceptance and significance. Right? We're talking about the questions behind indulgence, excessive, restrictive, destructive appetites. It's not about the food, it's not about the booze. And sometimes when we stop eating, this is why the monks and the desert fathers and the gurus and the sages, this is why they fast. Sometimes when we stop eating, we get in touch with where appetite comes from. And here's the real key. This is the deepest spiritual truth. When we fast, it sheds light on what we're really hungry for. sex, drugs, alcohol, money, power, success, food. Lent invites us to put these in the right category, right? These are snacks and they're delicious. Yum, 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 yum. The deeper question in Lent is, what are you really hungry for? Because if it's love, if it's acceptance, and some sacred work to give your life to, I have excellent news for you. These are already yours. They've been yours since the day you got here. And I'm not trying to hate, I'm not trying to throw shade. Trust me, that's why I shared so much of my shadow. There's plenty more that I won't share in public. But if you've got an appetite, some appetites for these snacks, but deep down it doesn't really touch the hunger, maybe it's time to give the snacks a rest and look at what's beneath them. Maybe it's time to admit you have a sacred appetite and snacks just aren't enough anymore. And you just admit that to yourself during Lent. That'd be a great start. Lent invites us to remember that our life can be more than satisfying a craving, more than scratching the itch. And we know it. We know that deep down, but we have to look into ourselves to remember. Are we living in ways that contradict our true self? What is most true of us? That we're loved, that we're okay, and that we've got such good work to do. Whatever you've been struggling with, whatever your battle in this very moment, whatever you're getting ready to fight the second you leave this place, here's the gospel this morning. You are more than that appetite. You are. You're more than that appetite. And that appetite doesn't do anything to your belovedness. It garners you no judgment from this community. You're loved just as you are. We could care less. It's about you. It's about looking into what it is you're really hungry for and how that appetite's getting in the way. Are you more than that appetite? You are. What are you hungry for? Really, the true self. You don't have to settle for snacks. And here's an important piece. You can fully enjoy them, these snacks, yum. You can fully enjoy them without abusing them if you know meaning does not come from them. You can fully enjoy them without abusing them if you know that meaning does not come from them. If we stop looking to the snacks to fulfill the deeper hunger. You don't have to eat and drink and drug and work and play against those questions because you know you're loved and you're okay and you've got good work to do. Right? The story of our tradition is that God has answered those questions once and for all people, and it is a divine and universal yes. You're loved, you're okay, and you get to participate in the good work. And the invitation of this way is to be able to eat and drink and work and play as the affirmation that the answer is yes. To enjoy every one of those snacks because the deep hunger is satisfied. And the practice that the answer is yes, as the community that the answer is yes, as these just hands and merciful feet of the answer is yes. You're loved, accepted, and your life matters. As you consider your Lenten practice, and I hope you will think of it as a practice, you've got 40 days to choose to do something or to not do something. As you consider that practice, I hope you will think of Jesus led by the Spirit into the wilderness for 40 days of examining his appetites, honest and aware that he could learn to live with his appetites in the midst of a sacred life. But it takes such intention to be that person. I hope you'll join me in that this Lent. Amen.